I don't know if you know this, but the atom still hasn't been discovered. The origin of this term atom can be traced back to Greece by a group of thinkers who theorized that if you continue to dig into the basement of reality, that if you continue to break matter down into smaller and smaller parts, you would find some fundamental thing that everything else is made up of, and they called this the atom. Now, if you have received a standard high school education, you can quickly see that the atom that you are taught about in school isn't an atom at all. This model that we are all familiar with has long been set aside as being the basement of reality, the fundamental particle that everything is constructed up of. It has been broken down into what we call subatomic particles. By the way, the word subatomic etymologically makes no sense. The word atom literally means undividable, uncuttable. It is something that cannot be broken down any further. And these subatomic particles have been given the title elementary particles or fundamental particles, which would make all of them atoms. In an interesting turn of events, the atom has somehow transformed into the atoms, which just appears to be flat out odd. So you can already begin to see that this concept or idea of the atom is some kind of moving visage or a holy grail that is being searched for. It's very similar to the concept of the philosopher's stone. As a matter of fact, I believe that the atom, the idea of it, and the philosopher's stone are manifestations of the same impulse, instinct, or intuition that appears to be stubborn within the human psyche. It is some kind of longing or searching for wholeness, oneness, homogeneity, a state of having no gaps, the union of opposites. There is no left and right. It is something like that. Whenever you look at humankind as a species, our historical thinking has been riddled with this idea. It's almost as if we know it's there, but we just cannot seem to find it. And you may be thinking, what are you talking about? You have already stated that. We have discovered these elementary particles, these fundamental particles. This is where it gets tricky. Similar to how we once thought that the atom was the end-all be-all, the sort of basement or fundamental particle of reality. We have since then discovered that the atom is an organism. It is birthed from the relationships of subatomic particles. Similarly, we can see that these subatomic particles are sort of like the veneers for something else. I'm not sure if veneer is the best word to use, but we can clearly see that there is something more fundamental at play. And this fundamental factor is a word that I'm sure you use at least once a day. It is unavoidable in these current times. It all centers around information. This word information is the key to everything. The very fabric of reality appears to have something to do with information. This is a very vast topic that spans several disciplines and subjects. But the thing that I'm trying to understand, or this grand inquiry that I have, hasn't really been addressed by any of them. For example, if physics is the study of how things interact, what I am trying to understand is what makes something a thing in the first place. Or in other words, what exactly is information? I know it seems straightforward enough, but would you believe that no one actually knows? And the tricky portion about this is that consciousness, the subject of this channel, this thing that I have become obsessed with, it has this strange relationship with information, so much so that they are nearly indistinguishable. From my perspective, I can't tell the difference between the two. And this realization raises some very interesting questions which we are going to explore in this video. Is reality information, or is reality consciousness, or are they one and the same? Returning back to Greece, within classical philosophy, it is referred to as nous, our capacity to determine things as being real. But under further examination, nous appears to be fundamental. And to understand what I mean by all of this, we can start this video off by trying to evaluate this simple question of, what is information? When people hear that word, they instantly think digital, digits, zeros and ones, bits. However, conceptualizing information as being digital is similar to conceptualizing beverages as being Coke. Digital information is just one flavor of information, and what information actually is something far more profound and ancient than that. To help people conceptualize what I mean when I speak about information, I have used several synonymous terms. I have used connections, I have used relationships, and also probably the most relatable, patterns. These are all words that represent or mean the same thing. I like using the term pattern because it really distinguishes everything from this aesthetic of computer science. But have you ever asked yourself, what does it mean for something to be in a pattern? What exactly is a pattern? I made a recent video where I analyzed this idea we all have of the past. And what patterns are has something to do with this concept. The best way I can surmise what a pattern is something that consistently repeats. This is the best way we can understand it or conceptualize it. Whenever something gets locked in this loop of consistent repetition, it's literally locked inside of a loop. It becomes unchanging, eternal, or singular. This is often how we encounter singularities. It is this weird, infinite folding back in on itself. And to us, we recognize this as some kind of thing, a unit of a thing. You can sort of think of it as these two poles that are pinging back and forth at the speed of light. They are pinging back and forth so fast that they become one thing. And this word thing that I keep using is a bit tricky to quantify. Perhaps it's been referred to as thingness or maybe language, but this is how we perceive reality, as things, as units of things. This is what information is. This is what patterns are. This is what nous is. You can look at the laws of physics. I'm sure we all learned about the laws of motion. When you look at this conservation of momentum, this first principle that an object at rest will stay at rest and an object in motion will stay in motion, there is a reason why these two statements are paired. Because an object at rest and an object in motion are the same thing. Or in other words, if there was an asteroid in some kind of vacuum, there would be no way to tell if it was completely still or flying around at 1,000 miles a second. The only way that we are able to tell that anything actually happens is by acceleration, by changes in momentum. Because what momentum is resistance to change. Without interaction, this object in a vacuum will just appear to be frozen in time or stuck in this continuous loop of self-reference. This is this eternality that I'm referring to. This is what's referred to as momentum. This first law of motion is a prime example of this principle of pattern that I'm trying to express. That's what patterns are. They are this strange, self-containing, looping, eternal construct that forms almost like this standing wave. And this is how our consciousness perceives reality. It is so fundamental that we have it enshrined as being the character of nature. It is a law of physics, because as soon as things start changing, the conscious experience turns off. Or in other words, once things cease to be in a pattern, they become chaotic and unobservable. It is this word observation that you will find we keep having to come back to. It's pretty pesky, whether it's science or anything else. Observation, the observer, consciousness. The observer appears to be the linchpin to progress, and until we figure out what to do with it, we keep painting ourselves in these corners. Our institutions, in order for them to continue to exist, they have to place what's called the subjective experience, the subjective observation. It has to be completely dismissible. But this is more of a misnomer because what's really happening is the individual subjective perspective is completely dismissible. Subjectivity itself is inescapable. And what we have in place is more akin to a utilitarian framework where we have outsourced the subjective perspective to the group. If I notice something about reality and I do my research, I experiment, I go through all of the steps of the scientific method, I have to present my case to the group. At that point, the group goes through my case with a fine-tooth comb. It's called peer review. There is a process or a group of checks that has to take place before the group decides if it's valid or not. And at that point, they sort of make this decision on if it fits with previous models. Are they going to deviate from their previously held worldview and adopt this new one or not? So you have this one mind that is sort of presenting it to this hive mind. But the key takeaway is that both of these minds are subjective. This is why you only get consensus instead of guarantees. It's kind of like having a jury trial with 12 jurors that they aren't voting or deciding on what actually happened. What actually happened is almost always impossible to prove. They are deciding what they believe. What they believe most likely took place. And I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with that. This isn't a criticism of the scientific process. It's more so an observation of the situation at hand. And observation appears to be the missing component. But we find that when it comes to understanding observation itself, it is this entire rabbit hole. It is this Pandora's box, this can of worms that we just rather not deal with. But this is precisely the can of worms that I enjoy playing around in. And as I stated in the beginning of this video, observation and information go hand in hand. They appear to be fused together in some weird way. This is why one of the weirdest questions that you can ask is, where is information? Perhaps you have heard this type of question phrased as, was mathematics invented or discovered? There's also, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it still make a sound? These are all coming from this same root question of, where is information? Do patterns exist on the inside or outside of our minds? And you'll see that this inside-outside dichotomy gives birth to these strange paradoxes that are difficult to detangle, but I've come to accept that paradoxes often point the way. The mere fact that these paradoxes arise point to some ancient or hidden truth that I think we have forgotten in modern times. And to show what I mean by this, we can play a little game in the form of a thought experiment that I cooked up. I've used this example before, that if you wrote a math equation on a piece of paper and stuffed it inside a plastic bottle and threw it in the ocean, while this plastic bottle is floating around in the ocean, is the information of the math equation still on the paper? If you say that it's just a piece of plastic floating around in the ocean and it isn't a math equation until it washes up on an island somewhere and someone picks it up and reads it, then you are making some kind of argument that information is tied to memory. You would be saying that patterns require conscious participation. There has to be some kind of memory that is being reinforced. It's, as I mentioned, that patterns are things that consistently repeat. It is the re-prefix here that is this play on memory. Or in other words, someone has to be able to look at this math equation and know that I've seen this before. It's kind of like if I wrote some strange symbols on a piece of paper and gave them to you. Is it complete nonsense, or is it a language that you don't understand? It all depends on what you have already been exposed to. This concept of memory, I talked about this in my previous video. Information, or when we perceive something as being patterned, it instantly gets stored as memory. This is what we all refer to as knowledge. But you'll see that you run into this strange paradox. It's called Zeno's paradox, or the paradox of inquiry, which just states that you can only know what you already know. I use this example all the time, that Julius Caesar couldn't ask about the battery life of the iPhone 12. You can only know things that are already stored within your memory. But this paradox is, if we can only know pattern, how are we able to learn anything new when learning by definition requires patterns to change? It requires the constructs held within your memory to be able to evolve. Knowledge, by its very own nature, should be closed off, or nous, as it's called in classical philosophy by Aristotle and the like. It should exist in its own island. It is to see things as pattern and unchanging. But in some weird paradoxical way, new information is able to enter the picture. Things are actually able to be perceived as happening. Or in other words, by some strange factor, patterns are able to change. But keep this in mind, because this is only one half of this weird coin, one side of it. Because if you return back to this thought experiment that I gave with the math equation floating in the ocean, if you say that it remains a math equation whether or not anyone is looking at it, then you are making this argument that information exists out there somewhere. It doesn't require conscious participation. If we assume that's true, that reality is some kind of objective phenomenon, that it is already information, or in other words, it is already patterned, then we have a hard time justifying how anything is actually occurring. We run into this weird paradox where we can't prove that anything new is happening at all. It's just like how if you're talking about chaos or chaotic systems, you're going to get the crowd that says chaos isn't real. It's actually already patterned. It's just that we cannot calculate it. We cannot see it. But doing so argues for a deterministic universe. If you are claiming that everything is already patterned, everything is already ordered, then information becomes conserved, just like mass and energy, which many people believe. But that also means that there is no such thing as new information. And this word happens, this term happen that we like to use, becomes meaningless. And these things that comprise the process of our lives that we call learning and experience are actually closer to revelation and witnessing, because everything is already in perfect working order and we are just seeing what's already there. Tomorrow has already happened and you are just waiting to see it. Julius Caesar could have asked about the iPhone 12. It's just that he couldn't find that information at the time. It was out there in the ether somewhere. He just couldn't make his way to it. The same way you don't know what color shirt I'm wearing right now, but the information is here, ready for you to find. It's just that you can't do it. But this also implies that we have never really created anything. This is something that people struggle with. This idea of determinism and free will cannot exist simultaneously, and it really bums people out. But I have approached this situation from both sides and I have made extensive videos on them. But after a year of making these videos, after a year of content, I have finally come to some kind of conclusion. Because both paradoxes arise from the same intersecting source, this common denominator. The first one being, how are we able to learn anything new? And the second one being, how is anything new able to happen? You don't have to be Einstein here to see that. This common denominator is newness. They all center around change. How things are able to change. Because logically, there should be some kind of closed structure like a circle that isn't able to be accessed. Nothing should be able to get in or out. But it appears that believing in this idea causes these paradoxes to arise. One thing I've learned about paradoxes is that there is always another dimension at play. If you know anything about dimensions, you would know that there is no such thing as something being closed off. Everything always has an opening. You just have to be able to see it from a different perspective, or a dimension as it's commonly put. And this perspective that we all have, or this reality that we occupy, what we consider to be true and real, or nous as it's put, is being intersected by some other dimension that presents itself to us as change or some kind of chaos. Without this factor, nothing would be happening, or to put it simply, everything would be patterned. Everything would be eternal. This is what people who have this so-called psychedelic experience all say, that somehow, some way, you are standing in eternity, that you can literally see that all of reality is some kind of giant pattern. Nothing is happening. As a matter of fact, the word happen makes no sense. It is synonymous with change. I talked about this in my previous video on chaos, that when we try and investigate the nature of change, we literally run into chaos. We get some weird, wonky situation. And the reason this situation appears weird and wonky is because we can see that some kind of way we are inside of eternity. It is this fractalized, reverberating, refracted, mirrored situation that we are all in. And it's hard to integrate this realization or this sensation into our day-to-day understanding, because we obviously do not live like this. We don't experience reality in this way. And I think that that is for some strange reason. There is something going on with our perception where it is being intersected or accessed by chaos. If you look at Newton, whenever you look at this first law of motion, an object at rest stays at rest and an object in motion stays in motion. What he is saying is, I perceive reality as being unchanging until chaos enters the picture, until something happens, until something changes. Newton wasn't analyzing reality, he was analyzing his own perception. Science was birthed from empiricism. Empiricism doesn't mean the removal of the observer, the way that we like to think of it today. The literal definition of empiricism is observation, to come to conclusions based on observation rather than just pure theory and logic. And the way that our observation works is we view things as non-changing until they change, until something happens. We view things as being naturally eternal and unchanging until it's disrupted. That's what it means for something to change, for something to happen, for previous patterns to become disrupted. This is what I mean when I use this term chaos. But you'll see that in this example, the natural state is rest. The natural state is eternality. And disruption arises from somewhere else. It is some kind of intersection. It is this intersection from some other dimension. I don't know, but for us, we have come to call this chaotic intersection time passing. It is as the Plato quote states that time is the moving image of eternity. Some kind of way we have fallen out of eternity and into time. And I'm starting to believe that this is what this whole Christian creation myth may have been suggesting, this Eden structure, some kind of way we fell out of eternity and into time, into things happening. And this is all being facilitated by what I call perspective or ignorance, as I stated in my last video. And some people really get upset about this. They think that when I use this term ignorance, I mean stupid or dumb, but that is just how you feel about what I'm saying. When I use this word ignorant, I mean it in a literal sense, to not know something. There is this illusion of privacy. As a matter of fact, whenever you look at this Christian creation myth, the first thing Adam and Eve did whenever they gained this forbidden knowledge was hide, put on clothes to try and conceal themselves. But obviously, whatever deity this was able to see them clearly. There is this illusion of privacy. We have this belief that we can behave as if we aren't being watched. You can view this privacy as the birth of ego consciousness. It is the separation from eternity and to have a unique perspective. You can only have a unique individual perspective by making other things separate from you. This is what chaos is. It is the viewing of reality as being different from you. It is this belief that there is some kind of difference between the inside and outside of your head. And I am going somewhere with all of this. I'm sure many of you who have made it this far have heard this rap before, especially if you are into these kinds of topics that I guess people consider to be esoteric. But whatever this factor was, this eternal, non-changing factor, if you are philosophical, you may call it form. If you are mystical, you may call it light. If you are religious, you may refer to it as spirit. But whatever it is, it fell into time. And we call this matter. It descended into matter. This is what time is. Time is matter playing around with itself. It appears that we have become preoccupied with creating some kind of time machine when we may already be inside of one. I mean, this is what your body is. It is a time machine. Everything is ticking and talking and moving around in all of these different ways. It appears that this eternal substance becomes matter, which is the experiencing of time, and then it goes away. This is what we call life. This is what we call being. As soon as an organism comes into being, the clock starts ticking. This is what it means to be an organism, to have an expiration date. When talking about biological organisms, we refer to it in terms of metabolism. This is the main criteria to be considered alive. And when referring to non-biological organisms, for example, atoms, or I dare say even the universe, we refer to it in energy states, going from high energy to low energy or energy decay or entropy, however you choose to phrase it. Everything that comes into being has to fall into decay. It has to kick the bucket. It has to meet the Grim Reaper. And this all seems to suggest something. Many people believe that it's not supposed to be this way, or that this is some kind of prison or punishment, that we are trapped here. But I'm actually starting to believe something contrary. If this is a prison, it isn't a very good one, because you can leave at any point, and we aren't here very long. I know the nihilists aren't going to like this, but I'm actually starting to believe that life is some kind of opportunity, that there is something that is supposed to be happening, or in other words, it has a purpose. You, me, the earth, the animals, the universe, it all has some kind of purpose. There is some kind of puzzle. It's kind of like this, that if reality is information, or if reality is already patterned, it is already this one thing. And what knowledge or nous is the apprehension of this pattern, or the grasping, as Whitehead put it. Then gaining knowledge and things happening is some kind of indistinguishable process, or at the very least, they are very closely related. And as a result, I believe that there is something that we can learn that makes something happen. And it is this kind of situation that I think is the entire point. We are supposed to find something out. And I think, this is just my personal opinion, but I believe that this realization, or this event that is going to transpire, is something like a joke or a punchline or a pun or some kind of irony, that in the end, we are becoming the thing that we've been running away from. I've always phrased it on this channel as some kind of process where consciousness is turning inside out. I prefer to use the word consciousness, but perhaps for many of you, the word intelligence is a better term that you can mesh or vibe with. You can view it as this, that life itself is some kind of being or entity or force or factor that is locked into this confrontation with the unknown. This confrontation is like this reverberating, fractalized archetype that is penetrating throughout all of life. We are all locked into this confrontation in our own unique way, whether it be men and women, day and night. I could go on and on naming these various polarities that we encounter on a moment-to-moment basis. Life is something like this. It is like this light in a darkness, or a child that is surrounded by this chaotic environment, like an alien in a strange land. And in the name of survival, as you look out into nature, this engine that is keeping everything going, this drive to survive, or this will to power, as Nietzsche put it. Intelligence is some kind of strategy to avoid annihilation. Life is in some kind of process, like a fire that is trying desperately not to be put out. It is trying to become indestructible, and it is doing this through ever more increasing branches of intelligence or consciousness. The entire goal of life is to persist and to ultimately defeat death. But the irony, or the pun or punchline here, is that we are trying to live forever in order to escape from eternity. And I'm going to end this video with this. Today is my birthday. Well, not today, but when this video was recorded. And after a year of making these videos, after a year of diving into all of these kooky metaphysical rabbit holes, these schizophrenic corners, I have come to realize that life is some kind of opportunity. Whenever you look at this whole situation, when you look at how metabolism works, when you look at how energy works, what energy is, it is some kind of gift or some kind of currency that you are given. And I think that we are expected to do something with it. It is just like the parable of the talents that we find within Scripture. Everything on this planet, all life, treats energy like it is more precious than gold. It is like this standard practice that is written into the laws of nature, where everything is trying to use as little energy as possible while still maintaining a normal standard existence. That is, until you get to the human being, this human animal. We are like this first species that are able to abuse energy. Whether this is via nuclear weapons or sitting around watching entertainment all day and living a completely unexamined life, This ability that we all have, this intellect or this level of consciousness is for some reason. There is a purpose to it. I don't know if I'm aging myself here, but it's like that scene in iRobot where Sonny had the denser alloy in his arm and was able to reach into this beam of disintegration and turn off the AI. There is a reason why we are able to do the things that we are able to do. And whatever this cosmic process is, this unfolding into chaos or this consciousness turning inside out, it is irreversible. It is all steam ahead. And the only thing left is to assist it in its unfolding, to become a friend of the pattern. There is a birth occurring, and we are to be like wet nurses for this birth. We are preparing the bride to meet her groom in this grand alchemical wedding. And the only question that remains, and I'd argue the only question that matters to any human being is, what should I be doing? A lot of people talk down on metaphysics, theology, and even philosophy is falling by the wayside. That when times get tough, when things become difficult, you cannot eat philosophy. You cannot pay your bills with these ideals. But the main takeaway from all of this is that, just as scripture says that man does not live on bread alone, there is more to this life experience than what meets the eye, and you are supposed to be doing something. What that is, that requires you to enter into the drama of your own lived experience, or as I stated in my very first video on this channel, you have to embrace your storyline. No one can tell you what that is. You have to examine your own life. Only you know your fears, what you are running from, what you are good at. And hopefully after a year on this platform, you were at least able to take that away from all of this. You must continue to grow and evolve. And that by definition requires you to do things that may scare you, other people may not understand. And I am on this same path as well. I will continue to grow, evolve, and progress my story. Who knows where that will take me? So with that being said, I hope that everyone had a good holiday and a good new year, and that you are starting this year off right. I'm going to end things here because my neighbors are making noise upstairs. Like the video, do all of the normal things that people on this YouTube airways ask you to do. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.